Hello everyone, investment scams rampant. Please vigilant and discerning. Do not trust information from unknown sources. Please make sure recognize two official Capital Securities community, Facebook, Capital Securities, YouTube, Capital Wealth Insights.
Hello, I'm Dong Jiaching, Tony. Let's start today's group discussion. Good evening. First, here are today's two main topics. The first, the password for today has changed. It's not AI anymore, but rare earths. Yesterday, the stock market's focus, though other sectors also rose, was the rare earths concept, which caught our attention unexpectedly. Unless the market focus shifts, that's what we're watching. Moving on. Sai, we need to talk about Ungshi, this stock. It's not a US stock, but I think it's something we should pay attention to. Alright, let's go over the ins and outs of it and help everyone understand what's going on. First, let's take a look at this. Last night, let me put it this way, last night there were basically two companies with earnings reports before the market opened. One was, Summit, something related to healthcare, but that's a smaller one. The other one, Cleveland, this one, this steel company announced its earnings before the market opened. We saw its stock price jump in pre-market trading. Wow. So, yesterday we mentioned that it seemed like they were getting into rare earths, right? Now, looking at how things closed yesterday, that does seem to be the case. Let's first look at their expected revenue, which was $4.873 billion, while the actual revenue came in at $4.734 billion. The expected EPS was negative $4.63, but the actual was a loss of $5.10. So, in terms of performance, its revenue and EPS performance, I think, just didn't meet expectations. I don't think it's particularly good. And it's one of the few steel mills in the US. We'll see some other steel companies in a bit. Of course, I want to tell everyone that its financial report isn't good, but why is that? Why would that be? So why did it jump so much and perform so strongly? In the end, the first thing he mentioned, the first advantage he pointed out, was tariffs. He said that Trump's tariffs would be around for a long time. If you want to avoid tariffs, the only effective way is to produce in the US. And secondly, he mentioned that he wants to enter the lithium mining business. Well, because the lithium mining business is new, this talk about entering the mining business was really encouraging. On Monday, the stock jumped up by 21.47%. So, let's take a look at this. I want to say that if a steel company gets into the rare earth business, its efficiency might actually be higher than if it were just a rare earth company on its own. Why do I say that? You have to understand rare earths. It's not that the content of these elements is extremely rare, but rather it's about there. The concentration of these elements in the earth is extremely low. For example, you might have to mine 10,000 tons of ore to get less than 1 ton, or even just a few thousand kilograms, of rare earths. That's basically how it's defined. So, it's not really about. It's not that this stuff is hard to find, but rather that its concentration is low. So, if you're just mining for rare earths, you might really have to dig up half a mountain just to extract 1 ton of rare earths. But the thing is, if you're working in the steel industry, you might be extracting iron ore or other minerals, and at the same time, you can collect these rare earth elements as a byproduct. This is actually a more efficient way, and it's also the approach China takes. That's why, during the development of rare earths in China, they were able to. Of course, later on, China focused on refining technology, but in the early stages, mining itself was also a key factor. So why is China better at mining and refining? In the early days, besides having the demand, they were already mining coal and iron themselves. Alright, and another thing is that in the early 20th century, when infrastructure construction started booming, China imported a huge amount of ore, whether it was iron ore, copper ore, or all kinds of other minerals. During the refining process, they discovered this, and then started doing it together, so their costs are relatively lower. So what we want to say is that maybe steel or mining companies handling rare earths are actually more efficient than if you just focus on rare earths alone. And if it's done by private companies, the chances of success might even be higher. If it's done by the state, the results might not be as good. And in addition, of course, here. Recently, American steel companies have been performing well, but there's also a bit of luck involved. It's not just good luck, it's because someone else had an accident, you know. But why is it that, the top aluminum company in the US is, of course, Alcoa, but there are also other aluminum companies? Of course, I only found out about this later, after seeing the news. Most regular investors already know that Alcoa is already very impressive. So in Atlanta, there's this company called Novelis, which is an aluminum products supplier for the auto industry with about a 40% market share in the US. This company is based in Atlanta, but it also has a factory in Oswego, New York. That same month, there was a major fire, and the damage was pretty severe. It looks like it will take until early next year before they can resume operations. And you know how it is in the US, when Americans say early next year, especially when it comes to manufacturing or infrastructure, you can pretty much expect delays. So if aluminum products can't be supplied from here, and you want to produce cars in the US, what can you do? You have no choice but to use steel products instead. That's why the steel industry is seeing some changes, so let's wait and see. I think what we're seeing might be due to speculation about rare earths, or maybe it's because of this supply shortage. Yesterday, the steel and mining sectors performed pretty well. But when it comes down to it, rare earths are still the main focus. Yesterday, if you look at the top player in the US rare earth industry, MP Materials, the US Department of Defense, or as some call it, the War Department, actually went in personally to invest in MP Materials. It also went up by 2.61%. As for Steel Dynamics, that company rose by 2.47%. Yesterday, it was up 2.47%. On Tuesday, they announced their earnings report, and, well, this. As for this steel, UAE also went up by 3.67%. And it's going to announce its earnings on October 28th, next week. Also, there's another one, actually, US Steel, because this steel company, you know, has a big reputation. Back when Carnegie Mellon was building up as the steel king, how did he monopolize the industry? At that time, it was basically America, and later it became US Steel. But this. Earlier this year, in June, it was acquired by Nippon Steel, so you probably won't be seeing its stock price or earnings report anymore. So yesterday, of course, we talked about what drove things up, and let's take a look at Freeport, which is in copper mining. Well, it's been a bit weaker lately because it's been affected by some recent mining accidents, so its performance has been relatively weak. Now, I've only listed a representative here, but there's also Southern Copper, which you can also look at, and another one, Newmont, which is mainly in gold mining. On Monday, they also went up by 2.45 and 4.54, so you can see that, actually, gold mining and copper mining stocks are rising. I think this is probably related to the imagination around the rare earth concept. So you can see that. This is also related to the increase. Now, when we talk about the keyword rare earths, it looks like it might be a hot topic for a few days in the short term, but it's not like AI. It's harder for it to stay hot for a long time. So, yesterday I mentioned to everyone that Australian Prime Minister Albanese set off for the United States on Sunday and was expected to meet with Trump on Monday. Of course. When Trump meets with Albanese at this time, besides talking about political matters like AUKUS and the US-Australia alliance, the most important thing is still about what? The main reason he's being asked to go now is to look at Australia's rare earth advantage. In a moment, we'll see the part about rare earth reserves. Besides the reserves, the most important thing is that the Australian rare earth producer, called Lynas, is basically the only heavy rare earth separation facility outside of China. So, for the past 15 years, they've been working with Japan to reduce risks. But as we mentioned to everyone yesterday, this is actually considered good news. Trump was really happy about it yesterday. He said that within a year, there would be an endless supply of rare earths. But in my opinion, you might be overthinking it. Australia does have reserves and mining output, but as far as I remember, their refining technology still isn't up to par. So, they ship it to Malaysia for refining, but Malaysia's technology should. In theory, it's originally from China, so, but having hope is always a good thing. Okay, on another note, we also saw a report here that talks about why China has been successful. The main reason is, first of all, The Chinese government encourages leading domestic companies to go overseas and make acquisitions. By acquisitions, I mean buying rare earth mines, buying mineral resources, so they buy up these mines. At the same time, through legislation, they prevent foreign companies from acquiring domestic rare earth mines. In other words, they buy other people's mines, but don't sell their own to others. And in addition, actually, the most important thing is consolidating the domestic rare earth industry. They merge it into a few major giants. This move has actually been ongoing, not just for rare earths, I have to say. When Xi Jinping was pushing for supply-side reforms, China was already working on this kind of consolidation. Now, when it comes to purchasing copper and iron ore, instead of each steel plant negotiating separately with Australia like before, now they've already consolidated into a single unified purchasing entity. So when they negotiate prices, quantities, delivery times, and transaction terms with Australia, they have a lot more leverage. Not long ago, they even pressured BHP to agree to China's terms, which means at least 30% of transactions are settled in RMB. Wow, and the pricing has also changed from annual quotes to quarterly quotes. So all of this is a result of the consolidation, and it's really starting to show its effects. This is the part he did well, right? Now, let's also take a guess here. When we look back, we see that when Deng Xiaoping went on his southern tour, he said something famous, right? It wasn't just about letting some people get rich first. Besides that, he also said something else. The Middle East has oil, and China has rare earths. Now, let's first look at the rare earth content here, using oxides as the measurement. Remember, this unit is metric tons. Here, it's 44 million metric tons. China is in the lead. Brazil, on the other hand, has 21 million metric tons. But the problem is, well, Brazil's current president doesn't get along with Trump, so let's not even think about it. Plus, Brazil's rare earths might not even be extractable, because they could overlap with the Amazon rainforest, which basically means you can't touch them. India has 6.9 million metric tons, but honestly, India doesn't really have enough experience or capability. Their mining capacity is pretty weak, so they still need China's rare earths. Then, looking at Australia, they have 5.7 million metric tons of rare earths. This is probably what caught Trump's eye. Also, in these numbers, they've included, wait, not Iceland, that's a mistake, it should be Greenland. Greenland has 1.15 million metric tons, so that's why the US kept talking about wanting to annex Greenland back then. That's the reason, and it's actually kind of strange. The US actually has very abundant oil and natural gas reserves, but they just can't ramp up production. The problem is, when it comes to rare earth reserves, the US only has 1.9 million metric tons, which is actually quite little. So, in this regard, we can see that, naturally, it's just not good enough, so in this respect, Deng Xiaoping was actually pretty sharp. Back in 1992, he already identified this issue. Of course, he was, What did he do, as we mentioned? He used state-owned enterprises to find problems, then bought other countries' mines, regardless of whether others wanted China to buy them. But mainly, after integrating everything, he still used some market mechanisms. It's not that the US didn't want to get into the rare earth industry. They waited until they were almost ready to start production, but then China started to reduce output, lower prices, and release rare earths onto the market. This caused American companies to lose money, and after a while, when they realized they couldn't make a profit, they just gave up and started buying from China instead. For so many years, things have been peaceful like this, so that's how it went. So, they just got complacent, that's what happened. So, Western rare earth companies basically fell into this situation, especially since China started working really hard again. They started improving their so-called refining technology. Over the past 14 years, since around 2010, they've done a lot in terms of patents and such. So, as we can see in the next part, here it shows that refined rare earths account for 90% of the global supply. Now, let's test everyone a bit. Actually, when it comes to rare earth elements, I asked this question to AI. Jeremiah said there are 17 of them, but here we have about 7. So I want to ask, how many can you actually name? Honestly, for me, I can probably guess the first 3. The second one, I have no idea, and I don't know terbium either. As for the first one, maybe I could guess it, since it's like the word for drip in Chinese, and Lu I might also guess, but that would just be a guess too. But this one, as for com, I could probably guess that one too. I'm telling you, you can probably guess most of the big ones here, but the other 10, let me tell you, you wouldn't be able to guess them at all. Like RU, isn't that used for something, maybe batteries, or electric vehicles or something like that? Anyway, RU and those other ones are all really hard to figure out. Most people wouldn't know this stuff. If you did, you wouldn't be working in finance, you'd just go into chemistry instead. Now, looking at this, it's about AI. On another note, let's talk about rare earth companies and how control over their supply is held by China. Right now, you can see that over 60% of mining is controlled by China. And also, this orange part here, this is, Myanmar. The US also has some, but the problem is, if you look at what they actually dig up, there's a bit from Australia too, but the issue is when it comes to refining, if you look at refining, almost 90% is done in China. So, this is why China holds a completely dominant position. Now, according to Morgan Stanley's in-depth analysis of China's rare earth controls, enforcement is difficult. Well, I think we should wait and see about this, because if we look at it from our side, China has actually made a lot of efforts in recent years. For example, they've added traceability systems, not TI Tong, but system. They've added a traceability system, so on this front, they've claimed they can achieve certain results. As for the rest, it's not really that hard. If they really want to enforce it, they just have to be tough. If they find someone reselling illegally and can't give a clear explanation, it's simple, just suspend and ban all exports. After all, 90% of the technology comes from us, right? So, if you want to get it, you have to play by our rules and sign an agreement with us before we'll let you have it. So that's how it is. Of course, they probably won't make things that ugly, but it's something to pay attention to. Let's give a special reminder here, China isn't just controlling these. In April, they announced controls on 7 types of rare earths, and on October 9th, they added 5 more, so that's 12 types, 12 that they're controlling. Out of 17 types, they're controlling 12, and as for the rest, I don't think you can really buy them either. This time, they're also controlling rare earth-related technologies and equipment. Personnel and equipment can't be exported either, and they're refusing any military use. They're also restricting how downstream products can be used. Also, let's especially mention that China has already imposed restrictions on key minerals. Let's all recall, back in August 2013, when Biden was still around, just because they were unhappy with Biden, they already started tightening controls and increasing restrictions. In September 2024, they regulated T, and in December 2023, they regulated graphite. Don't underestimate this. Graphite, as we'll see in a moment, is related to advanced graphite materials, and it's connected to batteries and power generation. In 2025, they also regulated tungsten, indium, bismuth, and germanium, as well as molybdenum and uranium. Especially uranium, this is extremely important for military applications. The steel core of armor-piercing shells is made from uranium. How do I know this? Because I was in the Armored Corps, and the armor-piercing shells fired from tanks use uranium cores. This line in the middle refers to uranium. And then, this time they also regulated super-hard materials, which means synthetic diamonds. I should mention here that wafer polishing requires these kinds of super-hard materials for the polishing process. If they really impose restrictions, it could actually be a big problem. Why do we see TSMC? Even though the government says the impact won't be significant, TSMC and the whole industry are still cautious. Why? Because some things will still be affected by these restrictions. Also, materials for lithium batteries and graphite anodes are being regulated. So don't just focus on rare earths, other materials can also be a real headache. Alright, so here, let's move on to the second point, which is the unease beneath the surface of comfort. The main issue at the center of this turmoil is, well, let's take a look. Back in 2019, China's Wantai company, Wantai Technology, acquired ASMC Semiconductor and made it a subsidiary. But first, let's talk about ASMC. At that time, the semiconductor company was being acquired, and its business performance wasn't very good, otherwise, it wouldn't be for sale. Its gross margin and profitability weren't meeting shareholder expectations, so they wanted to sell. So, after it was bought, the Netherlands and various European countries started to worry that ASMC's technology might be transferred to China. But honestly, I think that's pretty baffling, because ASMC sold. This semiconductor company, its chips are actually very mature chips. What we call mature process technology is used in industrial, automotive, and consumer electronics products. In other words, these are all relatively high nanometer chips. Some people say it's over 500 nanometers, this process. Some say it's 28, or even 128. I've heard people say that's already pretty advanced. But the issue is, of course, there are still some semiconductor technologies, or wide bandgap technologies. But what we want to say is that ASMC's products, in principle, Infineon from Germany and a few American companies should be able to provide alternatives. I think the concerns about this technology are a bit unfounded. And then, of course, there are issues with corporate governance. Culturally, that's bound to happen. When Asians go and run these European or American companies, there are always going to be management challenges. There are very few successful cases, but the only one is when China's Geely Automobile acquired Sweden's Volvo. That's a success story. But there are actually many tragic cases. One example is our own. Like AUO or whoever it was at the time that acquired Siemens, they ended up losing a ton of money, practically going under. They realized the costs were really high, and management was exhausting. So that's some of the experience. And of course, there's also the case where the CEO of One-Tai Technology was accused of wrongdoing. At that time, it was said the business and funds of Jiangmen City had already been transferred to China. Then Ungshi was forced to place orders with One-Tai's chip factory in China. I find this idea of forced a bit odd, because for mature process nodes, everyone knows China's capabilities are strong in this area. Whether it's really right or wrong is still a question. But besides that, there was also a personnel change at Gaoqi. That is, the high-level foreign executives resisted, and of course, the Chinese CEO, the boss, was very unhappy about it and wanted to replace them. So this conflict got pretty bad. Things started to get worse around the end of last year. Basically, the U.S. Department of Commerce put Ungshi Semiconductor's parent company, One-Tai Technology, on the entity list, emphasizing national security concerns and adding them to the list. So, on this side. Okay, so the U.S. warned Ungshi that they must replace their Chinese CEO in order to get out from under the sanctions. Honestly, I have to say, this is actually pretty strange, right? Sigh, to be honest, there are actually a lot of problems with this from a business perspective. Then, in September, at the end of September, the Dutch government used a very unusual and obscure law, the Cold War-era Goods Supply Act. Then they said it was to ensure supply chain security and prevent the outflow of critical technologies. They used this as the reason to take over Amplion Semiconductor. This actually touches on a major red line, which is whether private property rights can be infringed upon. In other words, this is a private company. Can the government really intervene like this? Of course, the Dutch government's takeover followed the standard procedure, freezing assets and intellectual property rights, with a one-year period to prevent technology from leaking out. But the problem is, by doing this, it actually causes the intellectual property and technology to leak out. China is also taking a tough stance. In October, they started restricting exports of certain products from China, basically banning their export, and also froze ASML's assets in China. This is just like imposing sanctions now. Russia is paying a price here too. You can seize the Russian central bank's money that's stored in Western banking systems, but the problem is, as soon as you freeze their central bank assets, they immediately seize the assets of Western countries in Russia. They just nationalize your investments directly, right? So, with this back and forth, when you tally up the accounts, whether there will be a loss or a gain is still uncertain. In addition, after all of these events had taken place, the Dutch government officially announced that they had remotely revoked all kinds of access privileges for employees who were working in ASML's China division, such as computer login permissions, as well as entry and exit access to the company's building and facilities. Break time equals 0.5s/. But the thing is, ASML China isn't exactly easy to deal with either. They immediately started operating independently from headquarters. They made sure to stabilize their supply chain within China. I think, in this whole incident, the Chinese government definitely played a role and got involved. So, ASML China definitely has ways to counteract the influence from the Netherlands. This is very important. We need to recognize that ASML is a global supplier of long-tail chips. Because it's long-tail, it means its applications are very broad, used in the field of very mature products. I heard from another media report that a single car might use up to 600 ASML products. Why? Because they might be used for things like sensors, for example. Radar, then those sensor chips, like the ones used in parking sensors that beep, or for example, the ABS chip or the seatbelt chip, since these are all mature products, that's basically how it is. NXP, Infineon, Texas Instruments, and On Semiconductor, these more established companies are the ones making these. Now, as for this part, China is starting to impose controls. Let me list it out for you. You have to realize that 80% of the production capacity is in China, and 50% of the revenue comes from China. Honestly, I think the Dutch government. Yes, well, there was actually a Dutch government official who came out and admitted that he was the one who gave the order. I find it really strange that when he gave this order, he didn't seem to consult anyone in the industry to ask whether this was feasible or what the impact would be. It seems like he didn't do that at all. He thought of it and just went ahead with it. So, 80% of your production capacity is in China. Once China blocks it, you simply can't get your goods out. And 50% of your revenue comes from China, so you immediately lose 50% of your business. Now, let's talk about something a bit more private, not something we usually discuss publicly. Let me say this in Chinese, just to clarify, 80% of your production capacity is in China, and now China is holding back the export of your products. But you have to understand, China is what people call the world's factory. If China also restricts your imports, meaning if you want to bring products made in places like the Philippines, Thailand, or other countries into China to be assembled into semi-finished goods or components, and then ship them to Europe, if China blocks that too, then that's what you would call a complete shutdown. So we want to make this point clear to everyone here, and it's something you should all pay attention to. So why is this worth paying attention to? Well, I think if you look at it over time, you'll see that China has already launched antitrust investigations against major US-based IC companies like Texas Instruments. I'm sure everyone remembers this. This actually shows that China's attitude is gradually changing. However, the products involved are mature process technologies. You may have all the technical patents, but do you really have them? It's not absolutely certain, because companies like On Semiconductor, Texas Instruments, and Infineon each have their own technologies and solutions. Results might be similar, but having something doesn't mean you control the entire market. As I mentioned, one issue is that it's a long-tail chip, and inside, it uses a lot of passive components for all kinds of different products. But you have to realize that in a car, if you're missing just a few key components, you can't assemble it. So in the end, will you really be able to carry it out? So what ends up happening is that European car manufacturers might run into production problems. For example, they might be forced to halt production or be forced to use parts from other suppliers, which could lead to price increases. This could have an impact. And we also need to remember the certification process for car manufacturers. The volume is huge, but getting certified by car manufacturers is extremely difficult. You have to go through a lot of TÜV tests and all sorts of external and manufacturer-specific certifications. They have to check your quality, because a car is expected to last 10 to 20 years once it's on the road. Of course, they have to be extra cautious. And there's something even more important. China only introduced rare earth export controls on October 9th. He later wrote that this is basically a case of killing the chicken to scare the monkey. The Dutch probably don't know or understand this saying. So now, Sigh, you just went up there yourself and became the chicken in front of China, to be killed as a warning to the rest of the world's monkeys. I don't know, I really find it strange. This is a huge risk. No matter how you look at it, it seems like you shouldn't do this. But, well, they did it anyway. So, let's take a look. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, right? Maybe China will just use this as a chance to practice, treating it as a 444 target or something. To be honest, if this chip blockade succeeds, then a rare earth blockade will probably succeed too. So let me tell you, I think this restless ASML might really be in for a tough time this round. Actually, what comes next is about the Dutch government. You might want to be a bit more careful. I really think this could actually happen, and the ones who might end up unlucky are probably the German car manufacturers. So these are basically the two main points we're focusing on today. Alright, so, the other thing is, the two main companies from yesterday were Cleveland, which is the steel company we just talked about, and then there's also ZN Bank. The main thing with them is that they set aside a $55 million provision for bad debts. But yesterday, they released their financial reports, and, the reports were announced after the market closed. Management came out to reassure everyone, basically to help the market accept that this bad debt is a one-off event, not a series of incidents. So, in addition, its third quarter revenue and earnings were better than expected, so overall, it looks like if no other bad debts emerge, the market's confidence in these regional banks could gradually recover. Yeah. So today, since we didn't get to review this week's very important corporate earnings reports yesterday, we're going to do a thorough review now. We'll take some time today to give everyone a detailed preview. Break time equals 0.5s / basically. Let's talk about it together. I'll use red to highlight the tech stocks that are more well known to everyone. Take a look at the blue and green ones as well. Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, and Lockheed Martin all released their earnings reports before the market opened today. I just checked their profits and revenues, and honestly, they're really solid, very impressive. But we still need to pay attention, because there are a few issues. First of all, the issue of rare earths. After all, China still controls rare earths as a strategic resource, so this could cause some minor trouble. But everyone expects that Trump will talk to Xi Jinping about it, so maybe if you wait a bit, things will get sorted out. Also, we'll take another look at this tomorrow. Tomorrow, we'll go over the earnings reports of these defense stocks in detail. Now, where's the other key point? It's about the US government shutdown. Because, you know, defense contractors rely on government contracts. But the problem is, if the US government shuts down, those contracts won't move forward either, so we might have to wait a bit longer. Also, today we have companies like GE Appliances and General Motors, Coca-Cola and CME, and then, the cigarette company Philip Morris, which is the international distributor for Marlboro. That's Philip Morris. And then there's also the oilfield services company Halliburton. And then after the market closes, there will be an earnings report from PACCAR, the heavy-duty truck manufacturer. That might provide some insights regarding truck tariffs. And Deere & Company, this is worth noting, because China might be conducting an antitrust investigation into them. The main focus of questions after the market closes today will be here. Also, there's Intuitive Surgical. Let me explain why I'm specifically mentioning this later. If you've recently been to a hospital or helped take care of an elderly family member, you might have come across the Da Vinci surgical system. That's a product launched by this company. And in addition, Netflix will be releasing its earnings report, and Mattel, ticker symbol MAT, the company that makes Barbie dolls, will also be announcing its earnings after the market closes today. Okay, as for tomorrow, there are fewer companies listed here because, well, their importance might not be as high. But I've still listed them. If they're not highlighted, it means they're not as significant. For example, KLA and Lam Research, these are semiconductor-related companies, so pay more attention to them. There's even a chance that they could impact the performance of Taiwan stocks. Also, Alcoa in the US is worth keeping an eye on to see if they mention anything about rare earths. The most important thing tomorrow, though, is that after the market closes, Tesla will be reporting its earnings. Tesla is the first of the Magnificent Seven tech giants to release its quarterly results, so we'll see if they deliver a strong performance. Okay, and then up to the 23rd, right? So here we have Dow Chemical and also this old company. But since raw material stocks have been relatively weak these past few years, next up is Molina Healthcare. Also, Honeywell is an important company in the industrial sector. This one is baby and toddler products, not just for babies, but also for toddlers. This is actually an indicator of consumer spending. Then there's American Airlines, but since Delta's earnings report was quite good, American Airlines. People are also looking forward to Southwest Airlines, Love, and others. Another one to note is O'Reilly. This is a company that deals in auto parts, a parts supplier, and it's definitely worth paying attention to. After the market closes, there's IMT, IMTC, and Intel. This Intel earnings report is important. As before, after their gold medal begging, this is their first earnings report. So, is there going to be a turnaround? This earnings report is actually very important. Of course, the next 3 quarters reports are all crucial, but a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, so everyone will be paying close attention to this quarter's results. Also, Ford will be releasing its earnings, and, I remember just now looking at GM's numbers, they weren't great. Revenue was good, but profits weren't good and earnings were poor, so we also need to look at Ford. If revenue is good, car sales aren't bad, but if earnings are poor, why? Tariffs are raising costs, that's likely the main reason. Moving on. After the market closes tomorrow, Newmont, the gold mining company, will be announcing their results. Also, on the 24th, there's BH Defense Industry News, and then there's Procter & Gamble, the big consumer goods company. This one is also worth paying attention to. This is one of the indicators of U.S. consumer spending. Then there's General Dynamics, another defense stock. Baker Hughes is an oilfield services provider, and HCA is a healthcare services company. Also, Alaska Airlines, which is part of the airline industry. So, roughly speaking, for this week, among the big players, the only one from the Magnificent Seven is this one. Just this time, and then also, as for those related to tech, this one, but it looks good. This is Applied Materials, and then KLA and Intel are probably the ones to watch more closely. The rest are also worth paying attention to, but maybe you can just follow up on the ones you're personally interested in. Now, let's look at some news. As for the patient advisor, TISAT said that if the government shutdown doesn't end this week, they might take tougher measures. Sigh, honestly, I don't really get this, because it feels like it should be the other way around. If you don't compromise, Congress will just become even more divided. But the thing is, with him saying this, I have no idea what he's actually going to do, or what kind of tough measures he means. Is he just going to keep laying people off until? So, does that mean the US government will only have half its resources left? Or what? But the problem is, no matter how much is left, according to the budget bill, any funding has to be approved by the House Appropriations Committee before it can be allocated. So, if you don't agree to the Democrats' demands, it looks like things are just going to stay deadlocked there. What is he going to do? I don't know. Sometimes there are even crazier ideas. I heard one wild theory that said, hey, Trump could allocate that money to the National Guard and then take over, like these blue states, the Democratic states. But if you do that, that would be a clear violation of the Constitution. If he really did that, well, China would basically win effortlessly, just lying down. So, I hope we'll get a clearer answer on this. But tomorrow, we'll talk about why the US government is shutting down. The US shutdown is set for November 1st, and if you add 3 weeks, that's October 22nd. When we get to those 3 weeks, let's take a look at the betting sites and see if there are any clues or signs that the government might reopen. And then, Benson Hassel also mentioned that he remains optimistic about the US-China trade negotiations. Of course, that's the attitude they should have, since Trump is already optimistic, so it's unlikely they'll be shut down. Also, Trump has downplayed the Taiwan issue. He mentioned that when he meets with Xi Jinping, they could reach a fantastic agreement. That would probably involve discussions about rare earths, soybeans, and Taiwan. Fentanyl is an old, recurring issue. I think it might be dealt with later. Rare earths are the key point here. As for soybeans and Taiwan, honestly, Taiwan is also an old, recurring issue. He also mentioned that Taiwan is like the apple of Xi Jinping's eye, or as some translate it, the apple in the eye. But let me tell you, I think it's a bit tricky. Why? Because bringing up Taiwan for no reason, well, that's something. There's a high chance it's not a good thing, so all we can hope for is that we won't be used as a bargaining chip in negotiations. But it looks like there will be talks, though we don't know what the outcome will be. Well, in any case, all we can do is wait. When these two big powers want to stir things up, all we can do is watch from the sidelines. Also, Trump mentioned that if an agreement can't be reached with China, he might use aircraft export controls to threaten Beijing. As for this, basically, don't even bother asking why. If you impose export controls on parts or any section of the whole aircraft, the first one to cry will be Boeing. Why? Well, if you are going to restrict me, then I just will not buy from you. I will cancel the orders and buy all from Comac or their own C919 instead. Can't they use other engines? Sorry, but they can still buy from Europe. And if things get really bad, at the very worst, they can even buy from Russia. And even their own domestically developed civil aviation engines are already ready. If they manage to pull that off, it's even more troublesome, because then even the most critical component will be domestically produced. For the US, that would be a loss outweighing the gain. Also, the US has issued warnings, with Representative Greer from the state legislature cautioning China not to help foreign companies that are developing key technologies in the US, threatening sanctions against these companies. The main target here is Hanwha Ocean from South Korea, which has been sanctioned. But let me tell you, Greer's warning is actually useless. Why is that? If they really want to take action, they'll do it all at once. If you don't compromise on the rare earth issue, you will definitely get sanctioned here as well. Also, some small American businesses have appealed to the US Supreme Court, hoping to have Trump's tariffs ruled illegal. If the court rules that way, that would be great for us too, since we in Taiwan would also very much like to see those tariffs declared illegal. If those are ruled illegal, then the extra 20% tariffs for so probably won't be something we need to worry about anymore. Next, let's take a look at the market. The main focus yesterday was on credit, and overall, concerns about credit seem to be under control. So, as we can see here, the US dollar is rebounding, but there hasn't really been much change in interest rates. The 2-year yield dipped slightly, and the 10-year bond yield also went down, so the yield curve has flattened a bit. As for Brent crude oil, well, actually, it's still mainly due to a single factor, oversupply, so on Monday, prices continue to fall, reaching a 5-month low. Also, on Tuesday, oil prices remained weak and kept trending downward, even though there was a red candlestick. I still think oil prices are there's still a lot of pressure. The issue is, it might still drop to 60. If it dips to 60, there could be a rebound. But the problem is, if demand doesn't improve and supply keeps increasing, then oil prices will really struggle. As for gold, it's been very volatile lately. We talked about this with everyone yesterday. If you're buying gold now when it's over 4,000, this is what we call trading buy. So you need to be aware of this. When you're trading or considering your outlook on gold, you might want to shift to a more short-term approach. The hourly and minute charts could become your key reference moving averages. Also, Bitcoin has been very volatile lately. After rebounding on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, it plunged again on Tuesday. So you really need to pay attention to this. If it drops sharply again, it could be a big problem. And in addition to that, as for yesterday, the US stock market was affected by earnings season. Starting this week and continuing for the next 2 weeks, it's the super earnings period. People are generally optimistic about earnings performance. You made a mistake. We're optimistic about revenue and earnings, especially earnings. We're also optimistic the US-China relationship will improve. On Monday, the market rose 1.12%. Before the market opened, we already expected it to do well. So, in the Dow Jones, the leaders were Salesforce and Apple. I'll talk about Apple and United Health in a bit. Also, in October, there were 10 stocks that rose more than 1.8%. That's actually pretty strong, because There are only 3 or 4 stocks in the Dow Jones, but 10 of them rose more than 1%, so that's a really strong performance. On the weaker side, only Home Depot and Walmart, these 2 retail giants, the benchmarks, didn't do so well. And then, additionally, only 2 stocks fell. Besides them, 2 more declined, and 1 stayed flat. So overall, the Dow Jones did really well yesterday. Similarly, the S&P also did great. But from a technical analysis view, yes, this is good, but ideally, we want to see another big green candlestick today for it to really feel like we're back on the upward trend line. But the S&P's volatility has started to drop again, which is a good sign. Also, yesterday there were a few stocks in the S&P that had pretty big gains, like energy stocks and SMCI. When we looked at it before the market opened yesterday, we saw that it was probably the one. There was a conference where they announced a new server technology, and it looks like the market responded positively, so it went up quite a bit yesterday. If I remember correctly, it's still going up in pre-market trading today. In the pie chart, it's basically Oracle. Actually, ZU will talk about this in a bit. So that's pretty much the leaders and laggards. The equal weight index also went up yesterday, and the Nasdaq was up as well. Similarly, just like either they approached or surpassed the October 10th high during the session, but the extent of this breakout still isn't enough. So, it's really important if we can close with a strong bullish candlestick today. Also, the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index jumped 1.58% on Monday, leading the gains with several consecutive days of increases. Onsemi and KLA were among the leaders. These are the ones that... Yeah, KLA was also up. On the other hand, the main laggards were Marvell and Astra. There were only 4 stocks that declined, so it's the same situation here. The high on October 10th was 6,876. Yesterday, both the closing price and the intraday price of this index actually surpassed that level, but the momentum just wasn't strong enough, because the candlestick was very small and left an upper shadow, so we still need another bar to confirm. Today is pretty important, whether we can hold the line today. The pre-market open wasn't very impressive, but from this perspective, the key is the closing. If we get a bullish, red, candle at the close, that would be a pretty good sign. Yesterday, the Magnificent Seven were still strong, only 1 or 2 were down, like Nvidia, but the rest were still up. We'll take a closer look at the individual stocks in a bit. So, yesterday, Apple had a big jump, up 3.94%. This is really important, everyone. It reached 262. This means it broke through the previous consolidation platform's resistance zone, so this is a pretty good sign. This is a sign of strong performance. Of course, the news is about the iPhone, right? Let me make a little joke here. iPhone 17 sales in the first 10 days after launch in the US and China are 14% higher than the iPhone 16. The market is really happy about this news, but since I'm not an Apple fan, I use Android. Let me just say, this only proves that the iPhone 16 sold really poorly, not that the iPhone 17 is amazing. Alright, it's good to see some gains. Having things go up is always a good thing. But what we hope for is that this momentum can keep going, that the upward trend continues. Another thing is Facebook, which also went up yesterday. Oh right, I was just talking about the OCP conference. So both Facebook and Microsoft went up yesterday, but Facebook rose more. But I want to point something out to everyone. The resistance at the 50-day moving average above is still pretty strong. And Facebook is set to announce its earnings next Wednesday night, which is very important. After the earnings are released, will it be able to reclaim that level? That 50-day moving average is really crucial, otherwise, the pressure will remain pretty high. As for Tesla, so, looking at this, Tesla is set to announce its earnings this week, which is why it surged 1.85% yesterday. Now, Amazon, although it did jump 1.61% yesterday, the problem is that it actually had some negative news. Its cloud system went down and only resumed operations after 15 hours. So this was quite an embarrassing situation for their operations. And we need to point out that Amazon's candlestick pattern actually doesn't look good. Even though it bounced off the 200-day moving average, the problem is that the 50-day and 20-day moving averages are pressing down from above. Once the price is pushed down, it can't break through the downward pressure. When there's real downward pressure, it actually becomes a bigger obstacle. It might need to pull back and consolidate for a while before it can perform again. On the other hand, Google looks like it's gearing up for a move. I think Google seems to have some upward momentum here, and this upper hammer pattern is being formed by institutions. Some say that with AI-driven ad revenue, Google could see growth in 2026. Right, and that's correct. Right now we're in the third and fourth quarters, and the financial report is for the third quarter. But most people are already looking ahead to next year's expected profit growth. And in addition to that, same goes for Microsoft. On Monday, it had a slight uptick. Its performance was actually a bit better than Facebook's, but the problem is it's still fluctuating at a high level. We still need a clear signal for an upward move, otherwise, things aren't looking too favorable, and the overall market sentiment is still pretty weak. As for Nvidia yesterday, it was looking bearish. But overall, it's still basically moving sideways and consolidating at a high level. Honestly, I'm not surprised by this at all. This is pretty much what I expected from Nvidia. At this point, taking a short break around 30 might actually be necessary. We can see that some of the stronger stocks have also recently entered a phase of high-level consolidation. However, as for Nvidia, the news has been relatively, well, you can see there's been some negative coverage. There's been talk about Nvidia, you know, helping OpenAI with, buying there. Basically, OpenAI wants to set up a data center, right? Nvidia said they would invest in it, and OpenAI would buy their chips. He said that it might require partial loans, and Nvidia would need to provide a guarantee. Well, honestly, I don't think this is a great idea, but since this news comes from foreign media and was translated using software, I think we still need to look into it a bit more. Hopefully, we can clarify things as much as possible here. I'll say it again, personally, when it comes to the so-called AI circular economy or the AI bubble that everyone is so concerned about, my view remains the same. The key is whether OpenAI can actually turn a profit. If they can, then the problem is solved. As for Oracle, their stock is still dropping. Last Friday, they held a briefing to explain things, but honestly, the more they explained, the worse it sounded because people discovered their level of debt. Their debt ratio is pretty high, and with AI expansion, the costs have gone up, so their credit rating took a hit and the stock plummeted. This is really important. It's likely to test the 50-day moving average. Whether it can rebound in the next couple of days is crucial. On the other hand, Intel is still going up. It should consolidate between $35 and $40. Whether it breaks out upward later depends on the earnings report, but you can't just look at one quarter, you need to look at 3 quarters. Only after that can you really tell if it's out of danger. If it is out of danger, then TSMC is in great shape and doesn't need to bail it out. Also, as for Broadcom, it was slightly down yesterday, but honestly, I still think it's just consolidating. However, I actually think that Broadcom and Google's charts are more worth paying attention to. If I remember correctly, yes, it's Google. Both of these stocks seem to be gearing up for something. So, it's actually worth keeping a close eye on these two going forward. So, in addition to that, as for Micron, well, memory is still directly, there's still a shortage. So if you look at the performance of Taiwan's DRAM market these past few days, you can tell that this trend will probably continue, and it looks like things will keep going well. So Micron is in a pretty good position, and right now with DRAM, HBM is crowding out DDR. This should be double data rate 5 production capacity, so that's causing double data rate. Yeah, so DDR production capacity is being taken up, which in turn puts downward pressure elsewhere. So regardless, even DDR4 and NAND are being affected. So the outlook here is relatively. It looks like this will keep going. So that's basically the situation. Alright, let's go back in a bit and take a look at how the market is performing. As for futures, actually, the pre-market performance at the opening wasn't very good. Let's switch over here to look at the performance, and then in a bit we'll check out individual stocks and answer your questions. But looking at this, it's actually a good sign that the pre-market turned positive, but I think we should still be a bit cautious. It's actually a good thing to be more cautious these past few days, but with a lower open today, what we need is one red candlestick after another to confirm the upward trend. So, opening lower isn't necessarily a bad thing, unless it's really bad, because it could actually present an opportunity. If it closes higher and the market pulls out a red candlestick, then that's actually a good sign. You have to look at it from this perspective. Now, let's also take a look at the pre-market performance. Oh, Newmont is actually performing pretty well. This one should have some South African mines involved. Oh, it appointed a new CEO, but surprisingly, its stock actually dropped to this level, which is pretty unexpected. And then for PACCAR, sorry, I saw it was dropping, but now it's actually going up. Sorry, I didn't click over just now. Let's take a look. GM is going up here, trunk. Looking at soundtrack demand, in the end their profits didn't meet expectations, but the market still seems interested. Americans appear self-sufficient. Recently, new car prices in the US surpassed $50,000, about 1.5 million TWD. When I was there, it was around $30,000 to $35,000. Now it's much higher. This increase actually helps car manufacturers' revenue, but profits depend on cost control. Halliburton is doing well. RTX is also doing great. Danaher is also doing well. ePen, this one is good too. I think it's an energy company. The one that does pet health insurance is also performing well. DGX is in the treatment sector, and then this one, GE Aerospace is also doing pretty well, and KO, Coca-Cola, is up as well. So it looks like Ford and Korea are about to announce their results, but pre-market looks good. Not sure if the numbers have already come out. ES should be Estee Lauder, and although the situation here is also good, it seems like everyone is reacting positively to today's earnings reports. Hasbro is also doing well. It seems like TMO is also doing well, and UNH is good too. So overall, today's earnings reports all look positive, and even looking at the top 25 stocks, they're all in the green, with gains of over 1%. Maybe the gains after the market opens will be even more important. And just now, Newmont, the gold mining company, also reported. PACCAR didn't perform well, really didn't do well, because they missed on spending, and the number of rides was also insufficient. Then, there's the home builder, and JBL is similar to Flextronics. As for FCX, it doesn't look very good either. It seems relatively weak, and then there's this one. That LB, oh, is it Albemarle or Air Products? This one deals with industrial gases and specialty chemicals. And OT4, that's the elevator company. This is Fonta Network, and then, actually Northrop Grumman, oh, they're not doing well with layoffs, so their stock is dropping. Seagate is also going down, and O'Reilly isn't doing well either. Looks like this area is struggling. Looking at it overall, the earnings report actually looks pretty good, so let's see if there will be a better performance later on. WDC is down, and Dowfu isn't doing well. Phillips Morris is also dropping. The e-cigarette segment has contributed to its revenue growth, but the stock price is still going down. As for Applied Materials, which is Applied Materials, it's also dropping. However, today's biggest declines are mostly concentrated in the top 10 stocks. And among the top 10, it hasn't affected the overall market too much, so there's a chance that today it might open lower or flat, but after opening, it could still end up closing higher. That possibility does exist. Alright, let's quickly take a look at something else. So, the US dollar keeps rebounding, while US Treasury bonds haven't changed much. That's the situation. Gold's decline has intensified again. It's the same as before, you need to understand me. When I say trading buy, you know what I mean, right? It's about trading, so everyone needs to get that point. That's all I can say about it here. Now, let's take a look. Let's move on to your questions. The key is whether there are rare earths that can be mined. Actually, there will be rare earths to mine, but in my opinion, Also, this is how it is with mines. Mining is really unpredictable. If you keep searching, you really will find something. But I think the issue now is that mining itself is a problem of experience. It's a classic issue. So, Jeff, let me have you answer this one for us. I think it's great if you can find a mine, but the real question is, after you extract it. After extraction, how are you going to refine it and actually achieve stable output? That's the key point here. Well, actually, Oracle's financial reports have been questioned. So you probably need to look at their financial statements. And today there's a technical indicator. The 50-day moving average might be touched, so we'll see if there's a rebound. Let me tell you, Oracle is a bit more positive this time, because last time, the gains from the good news were just too much, so the market needs some time to digest it. But I don't think it's pessimistic. Let me be clear, I'm not pessimistic about it. Gold has dropped sharply again. Yeah, honestly, at this price level, it's really only suitable for trading buys, just so everyone is aware. Will Koichi Takashima trigger a rate cut in Japan? Well, you'll have to watch him. You really have to consider whether he actually has the ability to influence proprietary trading, and also, he's working with the Japan Innovation Party. They're cooperating, yeah. It's the same situation, it's a fragile majority. Even though they've teamed up with the Japan Innovation Party, and I heard they're trying to form alliances with a few more lawmakers, so technically they have a majority. But the problem is, hey, the Innovation Party is still too young. Also, the LDP is leaning more to the right now, so when it comes to pushing policies in the future, will there really be that many people willing to stand with them? That's a pretty big issue, so, all I can say is that everyone should probably pay a bit more attention to what's happening in Japan. Yeah, sometimes you just shouldn't get your hopes up too high. I think for the most part, well, Japan has had so many prime ministers, almost one every year, right? So honestly, every time someone new takes office, people have expectations or whatever, but then after a year or a little more, they're gone. So after watching this for a while, you just get used to it. As for Oracle, I don't think that's really the issue here. It's not that bad, it's just that the guidance they gave before was a bit too optimistic. So now, they're going to have to pay the price in terms of time and space to work through it. Alright, so that's all the questions for today. We'll wrap up here for now. See you tomorrow. Bye.
Our company has no improper financial interests in the individual securities recommended or analyzed. The information in this program is for reference only. Investors should make independent judgments, evaluate carefully, and bear their own investment risks. If you don't want to miss the latest market updates, be sure to turn on the notification bell and hit subscribe. In addition, we have plenty of great video content on both Facebook and YouTube. Don't miss out. In our group, we share in-depth explanations of global financial events with you every day.